anything that might be useful to talk about before we move into today's material? On any front.
How simple should because I know you said simplify the diagram. So if we kind of got it down to 3 bubbles, is that too simplistic, or, I mean 3 big ones, I should say.
The bubbles want to represent probably your main topic areas.
Okay.
And how they relate to one another, and the bubble diagram or the flow diagram wants to also include your application. So it's going to show how the material is going to interact, and then it's going to show how the material moves to the application.
Okay.
The number of bubbles is dependent upon the number of issues you see embedded in your thesis. And those issues are typically chapter titles, and they're also the topic areas that under which you're looking for literature. In other words, they drive a lot of different things.
Okay.
So there is a point, I guess, where it could be too simplistic, where it's not showing all the things that are going on.
Okay.
But I would work with your chair on that. And if you want a specific feedback, stick around after class and I'll look at it.
Okay.
We'll talk about it for a second. Any other questions come up since we talked about this? I always want to start with that because hopefully you guys are underway in the process of immersion and being the doing process. That's usually what raises most of the questions. Any other snags, obstacles, confusions, anything like that? Okay, something I want to start around the room. Pick a little piece of paper out of here. We're going to begin to set dates for when you're going to do your process reporting. Also, I don't have everybody's chair. Did you get a chair? Is it Arlene? Okay. And you were talking with Craig. Did you guys make a deal?
Me? Professor Alfano.
Alfano's your chair, okay. All right. The reason I'm confirming is I'm going to begin to invite the chairs to come in and speak to us about their ideas about the thesis. Something while we're on the issue of chairs and committee, I wouldn't wait too long before you get your secondary members. I know sometimes students will work with their chair in the fall and won't even get a secondary committee together until spring. I don't think that's a good idea. Yes, it's a more complicated situation when you're dealing with more people on the committee, but there's some good things too. You're going to get more input, you're going to get more vectors onto critiquing what you're doing. And you're also going to avoid a potential relationship problem where somebody feels like you've kept them in the wings or you haven't involved them until late in the game when they really can't say much. So one of the functions of the committee is to provide input, to critique what you're doing, to test the plausibility of what you're coming up with. So the more eyes on that, the better. And we're going to talk in more detail about the committee. If we get to it, I'm going to talk about it today, but it's going to be soon. So I encourage you all, if you don't have your full committee together, meaning a chair and 2 members beyond that, to begin to recruit people for that. Okay, everybody get a number? All right, so what the numbers show is the order in which you get to choose which date slot you want. So number 1. It's not the order in which you're going, it's the order in which you're choosing.
Awesome.
So you see the dates, they're always Mondays. You see on each date there are 2 slots, so there are going to be 2 students for each one of those dates. You see a line here, so in this session I want you to sign up above that line. It's not fair game to say I'm going to do mine on the last day of class then. Because what we're going to do is we're going to cycle at least twice. You can see there's an opportunity for you to do at least 2 progress reports in here. So I'll pass this around. Who's got one? You got number 1 down?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You can sell your numbers.
I'll go up here, Fred. Yeah. All right.
So while I'm getting into this, you guys can pass it around to the appropriate number. All right, I'm going to move to a slightly different emphasis today. I've been spending a lot of time on the pieces of the product, and today I'm going to move to some process issues, or maybe a better term is project management issues. Project meaning your thesis. So this moves into some comments on a way of working and some recommendations, let's call them tips, tools, and techniques for navigating the thesis process. Some of these things we've touched on earlier, but I want to begin to turn and focus on them more today. And as you guys are living this, you know, these terms are going to mean something to you because they're not just words anymore. You're immersed in the process. So I want to spend as much time on each topic as we need to exhaust whatever questions or issues you have in your mind about that issue before we move to the next one. So my intent is not to go over them all and then come back. I'm going to go over them each and try to spend as much time on each as we need to who's got 4 as needed to get you comfortable. And there's no particular order to this, although I'm going to start with the ones that to me are maybe most important, maybe most urgent. Something I've mentioned earlier, the first thing I'm going to say is get traction early. Maybe that's the most important thing you can do in your thesis, is get clear what you're doing as quickly as possible. Now, there's a qualification to that, and that is that your thesis is going to wobble for a while. Even after you get clear, there are going to be redefinitions, there are going to be refinements, your committee's going to maybe tilt you off a degree or 2 in terms of your path. But the sooner you're clearer, the sooner you're confident, the sooner you're efficient, the sooner you're taking off and doing the things that need to happen to get your thesis done. And my pitch to you guys earlier was the components of that map. The way you get clear is to work with your title of your thesis, work with your diagram, which is the process diagram for conducting the thesis, work with your table of contents, excuse me, your work plan and your calendar, and your abstract. Those are the pieces with which you get clear and with which you get confident and with which you get traction. So it's a return to my earlier pitch that it's important to produce those things, produce all of them as soon as you can. Make sure they all relate to one another. For example, as I was talking with Tanisha earlier, whatever labels you wind up using, say for the bubbles in your diagram, those labels should also be your chapter titles in your analysis. So terms that are defining the chunks of the thesis, they should be carrying over into all aspects of your thesis. It's going to be a sign of confusion if I see one set of nomenclature in a diagram, and lo and behold, in the table of contents, I don't see those terms anywhere. So that actually simplifies your life if you'll make sure your term system, your system of terms and categories, is consistent across all those pieces. So let me stop and see. You guys have immersed yourselves in that task. I haven't asked again for an update of that, although I am going to be doing that fairly soon. But I want to see whether any new issues have come up around your title, your diagram, your table of contents, your work plan, or your abstract. Anybody efforting on that and not clear sort of how to move into it? I'm not saying that everything's clicking in place, but I want to make sure you have a way of working. You know what those things are, and you know how to move toward getting them done. And nobody's really
Like,
out to sea in terms of.
oh, go ahead. You can go first. I already asked the question. You can go first.
Oh, I spoke to my chair about the table of contents, and she's saying that what I'm trying to do is to wipe. Like, when I say I wanted to know what is architectural language or what is the written language, she's saying I would be searching that for a lifetime and still wouldn't narrow down. So she's suggesting having my concept is about the historic district in Spanish Town. Why not have that as the thesis and apply the language to it and see what comes out of it?
How do you feel about that?
It's like twisting what I had in mind as I was more investigating the language within the building itself. She's suggesting applying the language to the structure and see what.
So let the application suggest the research topics. So you're kind of turning it around. And you got a little bit of a fear that if you start with the application, it may not lead you to semiotics. It may lead you to something else. Does that mean you're not going to research the square that you were talking about?
It's still the square.
It's still the square. Okay. Well, okay, that raises the whole issue of managing your committee, so maybe we move into that now. She's asking a question about handling suggestions and input that may not be aligned with what you're thinking about doing. But it's all part of managing your committee. So let's just talk about managing your committee. You all have chairs. Some of you have your secondary members, some of you don't. You've heard me say it's a good idea to get them all in tow. So in general, the main person you're going to be working with on your thesis is your chair. By far, most of the one-on-one meetings are going to be with your chair. Your chair is the main person responsible for being your consultant through this process. Most of the time when you meet with your secondary members, it's going to be in the whole group. It's not to say that you might not have one-on-ones with your secondary members, but most of the time the secondary members are getting involved when you call a full committee meeting. You have to use your own instincts about when you do that. If you want a rule of thumb, I would say you probably ought to have at least 2, maybe 3 of those in the fall, maybe a few more than that in the spring. But even that's kind of a murky suggestion because it depends upon the chemistry of the group, how your thesis is going, and whether some committee members are getting itchy. You're in charge of when you set meetings. You pursue your chair when you feel like that's warranted. Most of the time, faculty are not going to come looking for you. So you're in charge of how often you meet and when you meet. And sometimes you can consult with your chair and say, I'm sort of feeling like I need to get the whole group together. What do you think? Usually when you meet with your secondary members, you want to have your act together a little more than you might have it together with your chair. Your chair is helping you through even the early muddy stuff. And it's not to say that the secondary members can't help you with it, but because your encounters with them are not as frequent, you want to be a little more together and a little more organized when you pull the whole group together. Because you've got a lot of faculty time sitting in. You don't want to just go in and look at them and go, well, give me some ideas. You want to show up with an agenda, with some questions, maybe some material, maybe a little slideshow. Be in charge of the meeting and show them where you are, where you're not, and where your snags are. Let them help you. It's not a jury setting they're navigating this with you, so they're not looking for you to have it all together. But they are looking for you to be in control and in charge, and to be in control of the initiative of the situation. If a faculty member or a committee senses that you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going, they'll happily design your thesis for you and you'll become their secretary. You don't want that to happen. And so you have to have the momentum, especially when you're pulling the whole committee together. And that doesn't mean having it all zipped up, but it means not showing up with way more questions than things that you're saying are flowing well. Part of working with people, it's at least a twofold thing. On the face of it, the committee is there to help you navigate your thesis and to provide input. The other reason they're there is to give you additional practice as you go through school of working with people. And that includes conflicting input. It includes hearing something that knocks you off balance or changes the trajectory of your thesis. And so, to me, the main thing you've got to keep in mind is this thesis is mine. I'm in charge of this. I will listen to all the input. I will consider all the input, but I'm not going to take the input as a directive that I have to go away and do. And what that means is I may hear 5 things from my chair or from the committee, and some of them I kind of like because it's lined up with what I'm doing, and some of it I might not like because it feels like confusion or 10 more things to do. So I'm going to go away and I'm going to think carefully about each piece of that input, and I want to keep minutes so that I don't lose things. And then I'm going to come back and show that, number one, I listened, I wrote it down, I considered it all. This is what I'm going to do about each one of those things. Some of them are great ideas, and even though I have to add a chapter to my thesis, I'm going to do it because it makes my thesis stronger. Or I'm going to add this section to a chapter that's already there. Or I'm going to conduct this little piece of an additional study. Or I'm going to reverse something. Other things you may say, you know, I thought about it and I used this part of it because I think this is valuable here. These things I decided are not aligned, and here's why. And so you come back with your response. Your response isn't, yes, I did it all, because then you're becoming their secretary. So that's part of managing the process. And sometimes you're going to hear something from your chair that might not be coming out of the intimate understanding that you have about your thesis. Sometimes you're going to hear something from your chair or the committee and you go, you know what? I don't like the way that sounded at first, but they're right. By tweaking this and asking the question a different way or aiming this slightly differently, I can see I'm going to do a better job. I'll have a clearer sense of what I'm about. I can visualize my end game more clearly. That's all part of managing the people thing. And so the committee isn't there to make things smooth. The committee's there to help you do a good thesis. And sometimes that means a bumpy ride. And managing that ride is part of what you're supposed to be navigating in the thesis passage. So the most important thing to me is you decide when those encounters are. You decide what the agenda is for each of those encounters. You run the meeting. You take minutes. You take the input away. You think about it. And then the next meeting, you tell them what you did about it. It's your thesis. You're in charge of it. Now, some faculty are going to participate more strongly than others. That's just personal style. But they're all going to push you to try to get a sense of what you're doing that's clear in their mind. One of the tests that faculty use to get a feel for whether their thesis students seem to be doing okay is, can the faculty describe the thesis to somebody else? Does the faculty understand what you're doing clearly enough that when they pass somebody in the hall and they say, hey, what's George doing? they've got something to say. They're doing bing, 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 and they're going to apply it to this, and that's how it works. So the faculty is looking for that kind of clarity, and if you're too muddled or not clear or not organized, then they're going to get antsy, and that's when they tend to swoop in and go, okay, you don't know what you're doing, so do this. Because the faculty want you to succeed. No faculty wants a record of thesis failures, where you guys don't finish, or worse, you wind up with a weak thesis that never should have been presented, and then everybody goes, they shouldn't have presented it to him. So those are some general comments about the committee, and it can be tough because this is a role reversal for you guys. You're used to the faculty being in charge and standing up there and delivering material and asking you to do stuff to prove you understand it, and then giving it to them to see whether you did understand it. Now you're in charge, and they're consultants, and so changing those hats can somewhat be uncomfortable, not just because somebody who used to be at the head of the class, giving lectures, is now, in effect, in a secondary role. They're in a role of helping you to the extent that they can. And sometimes that's a tough thing to get used to, but it is part of the thesis passage. And it is part of practicing before you get out of here of managing people, managing committees, managing bankers, managing clients, managing building review committees. Your life is going to be full of that stuff. And every possible personality type that's out there you're going to run into. So you're just getting a sample of that here. Let's see if there are any other things on my list around the committee. I think you should expect the fact that you're going to get sometimes differing input from the committee. The committee, the three are not always going to agree on things. Sometimes they'll work it out in a discussion at your meeting, and they'll go, you're right, this idea I had is going to make him take a right turn, and a right turn is probably not a good idea. But sometimes you'll be left with 5 or 6 ideas, some of which are contradictory. And that's part of the muddiness, handling the committee, handling the fact that they're not all of one mind, handling the fact that they think different thoughts about your thesis. That's why I'm saying you take it all in, and then you go away and you sift it out. There's nothing wrong with voicing your reaction to what's said there. But when you first hear it, that's probably not the time to work it out. The time to work it out is after you've gone away, you've thought about it, you've decided whether you're going to use it or not, or parts of it. Then the next time you go, you can clearly say, what I heard in the last meeting was this. This part fits over here. This part, I don't see how I'm going to be able to use it. So that's what I mean by considering what they say, not taking what they say as gospel. Has anybody run into things with respect to their chair or their committee that I'm not touching on? Any situations or configurations that I'm not addressing? So I'm not answering your question specifically. I'm not going to say, well, that's wrong and that's right. That's something you got to just think about. And whether you feel like the integrity of your original thesis interest is intact, and whether you can get at it or not. And if you're not, whether you're okay with the new configuration. Only you know that. That's not something we can put on the table and objectively arrive at. So if you're feeling off balance because you got a suggestion to do this and not that.
She's going to say do this and not that. It's just that when I spoke to her, she kind of totally twist to it.
Right.
And it had me, which would be better is it to apply the pieces to a structure or to extract the language from the structure itself.
And I think you're doing, for me, you're doing a good job of saying, this is the nub of the question. You know, you had thought about it being this way, now it's this way, both things are still there, what happens if I reverse the order? That's a contemplative, pondering thing that I think you have to do. And it's absolutely fair game for you to go back to your chair and say, you know, that suggestion threw me off balance and I've been thinking about this. I want to air it out some more. You know, so it's okay to go back and say, these are my concerns. You know, it's because your chair, it's a working relationship. It's not, I need to make sure my act's totally together before I go in there. You know, the chairs are used to you guys having questions, being stuck in the mud, being confused, being, you know, whatever. So let them help you work it out.
Now, I see where your chair is coming from. What if you did the language and I'm not applying to the application that you, I mean, you already have the application, so you might as well use that to take the language out of it.
You're saying you're not bothered by what she said.
No, because if she does all the research and it doesn't apply to the application in the end.
She's saying that language is a wide thing in architecture. So having to do all of it is going to take more than just 2 semesters. So since I know I want to do language, why not extract it from the application? Because I know where I want the building to be. So it's always been that place. So why not read it a different way more than saying I'm going to go in and just investigate? Because suppose at the end of the day, I still don't get what I want.
Yeah, I think what she's concerned with is maybe the words you used in describing your interest in semiotics hasn't been narrowed down enough. And if she thinks you're taking on semiotics as a body of information, that's probably scary to her. And so you're just talking about an architectural application of semiotics in a particular urban cultural setting, which means you're taking a slice out of it. And maybe you're not good yet at describing what that slice is. What are those signal systems in architecture that will let people know that this is a place to come back to? That's really, to me, what you're after. So another way of answering this is get better at saying incisively what you want to do, so she's not scared you're taking on the world, you know, that kind of thing. But we're not going to answer the question. You have to ponder that, and that's going to be true for all your questions. But we can react. You know, we can give you more grist for the mill and say, think about this, think about that. So what else is going on, or is anything else going on that's problematic or worth talking about with respect to the chairs and committees?
Another question: does the committee members have to be architecture faculties? They have to be from this faculty?
You know what? I would look at that graduate manual. I know that it used to be that you could go off campus and get a non-faculty person to be on the chair, on the committee. I don't think that's true anymore, and I think they have to have graduate faculty status. And so there are rules now which govern who can be on the committee and who can't be on the committee. Are you thinking you'll go to another department or something like that?
Since my thesis is in the historic district, and I have to understand about rehabilitation and what I can touch. During my design process, what I can touch, what has to remain and all that, I was thinking about having somebody who's specifically in that area.
Your chair is already in that, right? But maybe you don't want her to double function there. I would double check the manual I think it's okay to go to another department if that's what you're thinking about. Because I can think of situations where there have been people on committees that showed up from other departments at the final presentation. And I can think of situations where they came to committee meetings. I can think of situations where the rest of us never even saw them until the final committee meeting. The student just dealt with them separately. So that's some research I think you need to look at. That raises another issue too. There have been a couple of you who wanted some meetings with faculty, including me, who weren't officially on your committee. That's fair game. You can talk with anybody on the faculty, whether they're on your committee or not. And so if you want to huddle with somebody because you think they can provide some meaningful input or suggestions or guidance, seek those meetings. And, yes, they're not in the setting of the committee, but you are not limited to your committee in terms of people that you seek conversations with. And that's totally off the grid in terms of the university and manuals and all that stuff, because they don't have any official status. Talk to anybody you want to.
As far as the, I guess, the involvement of your chairs of your committees, like how is it important for your chair to be involved in your thesis? Can you have more say from your committee members as opposed to your chair if it proves kind of difficult in order to meet with your chair? I mean, because at the end of the day, I guess it's just them approving of what you did.
Well, my first reaction is that's tricky because presumably you chose your chair because that's the person you primarily wanted to work with. And it's hard to get a divorce after you make that deal. That's really awesome. So that may be the reality of it, that you're finding conversations with committee members more fruitful than conversations with the chair. And sometimes it's simple mechanics. You can't get your chair pinned down to have a meeting, but these other people are available and accessible, and you can get at them more easily. The flow and ebb and chemistry of that's going to find its own level, but generally your intention should be to primarily work with your chair. And if it turns out that, for whatever reason, let's just say convenience-wise or availability-wise, that a member is more available than the chair is, it might be something you just air out with the chair. Are you okay if I have substantial conversations with this person, as long as they're on the committee, you're supposed to be talking with them. But if you graft airtime, FaceTime, usually it's mostly with the chair. And they're also primarily responsible for the quality and I'm not going to say completion of the thesis. You're responsible for all that. But of all the faculty members on your committee, they're the ones who edit most carefully. They're the ones who read most carefully. And so they've got the by far the heaviest load in terms of whatever faculty do on committees. Now that's not to say you're not in charge of it. You're still in charge of it, and you're responsible for finishing and the quality of it and all that. But the weight of responsibility once you start looking at the faculty is by far with the chair. So it would be awkward if, let's say, you wound up at the end with a thesis primarily shaped by conversations with somebody else, and here's the chair who's got to edit it and make their sense of it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, it's a configuration, it's a tangle, it's life. Okay?
Right.
So let's see what you do with it.
Right. Gotta get it done.
There's no tidy answer to an untidy question. So that's a good one. It's a real one. What else are you guys listening to? Well, do expect turbulence. There's a tendency, knowing that when you encounter another soul, whether it's your committee member or chair of the whole thing, there's no doubt that it complicates your life. Would you like to just curl up in a room, shut the door, and do the thesis by yourself? Probably. Because then you wouldn't have to answer to anybody. You wouldn't have the knocking off balance of other ideas and additional suggestions, but that's not the way the world works. And so that's not the way the thesis works. You have to engage your committee. And it is true that some students will navigate this process and will only engage the committee minimally. That they'll in effect hide from the committee because they just don't want the confusion and turbulence and all that comes with it of having to put it on the table and have 3 other eyes look at it and react to it. But that's the nature of our profession. You have to put it on the table and you have to let these other sets of eyes look at it and react to it, and then you have to react to that. So the thesis is inherently a messy process. And managing the mess is part of the challenge. And that's why traction and clarity and confidence and momentum as early as possible is important. Because in a strange and really cruel way, the longer you stay unsure, the more your committee is going to be unsure, the more they're going to push into what you're trying to do, which is going to make you more unsure. And so whatever pathologies and toxicities are in the process, they're going to escalate. If you don't have your act together enough, early enough to have your committee in tow as consultants as opposed to having them own it. You don't want them to own it. Because it's not their thesis, it's your thesis. What else is going on with the committees and the chairs? One other idea that comes to mind is sometimes it's not easy to get the whole committee together because of different schedules that the faculty have. So you want to begin by approaching them individually and asking them when their best windows are. If you're blessed by grace, they're going to line up. Chances are they're not going to line up. Maybe 2 of them do. And so you go to somebody and say, would you be willing twice a month to come in on Thursday? You work with the one who's the anomaly. So that's another thing you've got to manage is how do you get them all together? And managing their calendars with your calendar to make that happen. So it's project management in a very real way. It's not unlike managing an architectural project. There's not as many moving parts, but there are enough of them to create challenge and complexity. Did you guys finish putting your names on the calendar? Did everybody sign that?
We have a question about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could more people start signing the bottom of it too?
No, because we're just going to repeat on the section. No, you got to be in the top, above that line.
Some people.
Nice try. What's your question over there? About this? You have a question about that?
No, because I thought that we had to do it twice.
Yeah, you will be doing it. No, you've got it there. Are you talking about these?
Yeah.
No, you just signed. Did some of you sign up twice?
Yeah.
Yes. Some people.
No, everybody just needs to sign up here. Did everybody sign there?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're there, this is just going to repeat itself down here.
Okay.
So I'll just strike those. This is just going to repeat itself down here. And on the day when there's a blank, I'll use that for something that I want to do.
Okay.
All right, so those of you who signed up below the line, that's
Actually,
nice.
for clever.
Let me say a couple of things about this. Now, these are not great big splashy presentations. This is all in-house. This is you reporting to us how it's going, giving us some information on probably at least two fronts, and you decide this. One front is, how's the thesis management process going? And the other one is, get us as smart as you can about your topic. You know, we're kind of interested in seeing what you're learning and getting smart about whatever your topic is. And you may use one of your presentations for mainly process stuff. Maybe you use the other one to say, here's the stuff that I've learned. I'm going to get you guys up to speed on the main concepts in this field. Something that I want to encourage you to do, if you choose, is to invite your chair to come when you're presenting. You don't have to do that, but it's a way to engage your chair. If you want to keep it all in house because you're going to talk about your chair, then I wouldn't have them there. You decide what it is, but I'm not expecting great big flashy posters, you know, big flashy PowerPoints. It would be nice though if what you're going to say, if it needs props, to have some props. Maybe one or two slides, maybe a handout, maybe you do some board work. You decide what it is so that you augment what you're saying, maybe beyond just sitting in your chair and talking. That would be the minimal. But you do have to think about what it is you want to talk about. And I'm thinking each of you will talk maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I'm sorry, you won't talk that long. You'll talk maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then we'll leave some time for reaction and maybe input and have you tried this, have you tried that. So it's not just, here's where I am. I want to leave a little time for discussion. But there's nothing else happening on those days. So if it's 50 minutes, you can count on 25 minutes, you know, owning 25 minutes of the class. And so try to manage that 25 minutes so you leave some time for some reaction, rather than filling it all up with using all the airtime. Okay, that's probably a pretty good stopping point. If as is true for the other sessions we have, if something's mentioned in a class, like some of the things I've said about committees, that raise questions for you between classes, then bring them next time. Once we've talked about something, it doesn't mean we can't go back to it and discuss some other issues around it. So getting the early start and traction and managing your committee or keeping your committee in tow, those are two things on the list of project management, and I'll move into some of the others next week. All right, so you guys on?
I have one question real quick about the writing style. I looked up on the graduate site what the format they want. They said it's optional, doesn't really matter. It's up to the chair, the committee. I wasn't sure if you counted it one style, writing style, or citation style, but it's more.
When you say writing style, you mean ways of giving credit, or?
Right. It's like APA or Chicago style.
I would just pick one. Yeah, and my inclination is to pick a simple one. You know, for me, a really good credit-giving thing is numbers that code to the bibliography. So whenever I see the number 1, I look back there and I see what the source is. If you want to get more specific than that and you're going to cite pages, then you probably have to have a consecutive numbering system where 1 is this book, page so-and-so, 2 is this book, page so-and-so. So I would use a simple system. I also would, part of that simplicity would be some marking in the text that shows where you got it, and then you look back in the bibliography as opposed to 3 inches of footnotes on each page. I know that some fields like footnotes where you see the source right there. To me, sometimes that can eat up too much of the page, and it's also a distracting thing. If I want to know what it is, then I can look it up and back. But the big answer that I want to give you is pick one of those ways of doing it that makes sense to you and just use it. And if the manual suggests some alternative systems, then you've got your cool alternative ways of working. Okay, see you guys on Monday.